But anyways, but that was really uplifting to be able to be a part of that, and it is a blessing to be here with you tonight. And like I said, my name's Josh Waffird. I'm a junior at Freed Harbor University. I know that tonight, I came up here with Colby, and I know a lot of y'all know him, is what he was telling me, and he's a really great guy from the short time that I've got to know him, and I really hope that if you are a student, that you'll consider going to Freed Harbor and talk to him or Abby, who's here tonight, or even me. It's a really special place where you get to go and do things like I just did this weekend. I can't imagine going to another school and being able to grow as much as I have in my faith in the way that I have. But to go ahead and get started, one of the most popular children's books in recent times, at least when I was younger, is a book called Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. It's about a little boy around the age of 6 to 8 years old, and he has what people call one of those days, when you wake up and it just seems like from beginning to end of the day, everything goes wrong. Back-to-back letdowns and frustrations. And the book begins like this. He wasn't content in any way whatsoever. The book begins like this. I went to sleep with gum in my mouth, and now there's gum in my hair. And when I got out of bed this morning, I tripped on the skateboard, and by mistake, I dropped my sweater in the sink while the water was running. And I could tell that it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. I think we all experience days like this. I think that it provides us an opportunity to understand that everything that happens in our life provides an opportunity for contentment or discontentment. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Those opportunities, some of those things that provide an opportunity for contentment or discontentment are things like your families or your friendships, the job that you have or that you don't have, that career path that you're on, that you're not on, the amount of money that you make or that you don't make, that you want to make, the classes you get to take in school, the vacations you get to go on. Every single one of those things, every little thing that happens to us in life is an opportunity for us to be content or discontent. We have a little phrase that's kind of like a side dish to this topic of contentment in a discontent world, which is, the grass is always greener on the other side. And so I want to ask you as we start off is, how satisfied are you with your circumstances today? Ask that question to yourself in your head. Don't just read it on the screen, but how satisfied are you with your circumstances today in life? Are you living in a state of peace and contentment, or are you living in a state of worry, restlessness, fear, unknown, not really sure what's going to happen? In a lesson I heard a couple of years ago, a preacher at our church, Brian Stevens, some of you may know him. He has a friend, and we have a mutual friend on Facebook. His name is Brian Cobb, and he had been going through some things in life regarding his wife and some health issues and other things that were going on, and he did a very personal study of the book of Philippians, and he did a very personal study of contentment through this book, and he released a series of quotes on Facebook regarding this study, and I thought they were really powerful. It was very insightful for someone who's much more wiser and more experienced than me, and so I like to use those. But let's read what was just read for us in Philippians 4, chapter 4, verses 11 through 13 we had read. Let's read it again. Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 through 13. This is Paul speaking. He says, "Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Brian's first quote from this extensive study that he did in the book of Philippians was this: "We are so accustomed to pushing buttons, flipping switches, clicking mouses, and swiping credit cards for instant gratification that it's no wonder we might struggle to learn patience and thus also contentment. Lord, bless me with contentment, and I want it right now." Patience and contentment are both learned, not instantaneous or spontaneous. Brian's second quote that he released after this study was this: "Whether or not you are content may depend on what you love most, that to which you are most devoted. If you love things, stuff, money, pleasures, self, more than God, you may never be content." The media feeds us discontentment. It tells us in our commercials, on our shows, and everything that we do, you get those ads on Facebook or your social media that you go through, and it's always telling you that you need this or that if you had this or that you'd be happy. And it tells us that all the time, and there's so many times that we literally will buy into that. We will spend our money on these things that the media tells us. And in Luke 9:23 always takes me back to think about this. In Luke 9:23, Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Jesus calls us to deny ourselves and the things that we're devoted to that are worldly, that are earthly. There was this comedian who was on a talk show one night. I don't remember what late night show it was, but I remember I thought it was a pretty good bit and it had a good point to it. I want to say it was titled something like, Everything's Amazing and Nobody's Happy. And he was talking about and giving examples of all these wonderful modern technological innovations that we have, all these amazing things like the iPhone and computers and the internet and all these wonderful, wonderful things. And he's saying that everything's amazing and nobody's happy. And the specific one that I remember was, my favorite part was, he was talking about airplanes. He was talking about how, used to you have to ride a horse or a wagon for years to get to where you wanted to go. And how now we can get in an airplane. And I went to South Korea earlier this past year. I got there in like 16 hours, which is a long flight to me. But that's amazing that I can do that. And he was saying it's so awesome that we're so high, 30,000 feet up in the sky, but you want to sit here and complain because you sat too long on the runway, or you want to complain because there's not enough leg room, or because the person leaned back, or the peanuts weren't as good as you wanted them to be. And he says there's all these things that we want to complain about and nitpick at, but you're literally sitting in a chair flying through the sky. Like, perspective is what he's trying to teach. And I thought that was such a good point. And it's a great one, and the point of it is this. Even though life is more comfortable, even though we have some amazing technological breakthroughs from where we were 50, 100 years ago, even though so much of what we have around us is really amazing, people are not any happier. And in fact, I would go as far as to say that maybe as a society we've become more and more, or less and less, discontent. Less and less content. And this result of this is a nationwide epidemic of discontentment. I think it's in our culture and our society and everything that we do in some cases. So I just want you to test this. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. And I just want you to ask them seriously in your mind. You may answer yes or no to all of these. And this is just kind of a test for you to know where you're at. I don't often compare myself to other people. Yes or no? I'm not jealous of someone in my family or circle of friends. Yes or no? I'm truly happy for friends who get what they want, even though I may not be where they are. I can give compliments and be happy for other people's successes without envying. I thank God for the circumstances of my life. Yes or no? My income is enough. I'm happy with my job. Not every day's a picnic, but I'm glad I have it. Most people can't know whether or not you're discontent or content in your life until you ask yourself some of these questions, until you check with your circumstances in life. And that is the exact lesson behind Alexander's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. It's that idea of, if I can just get this or that, then I'll be happy. If I can just get a little bit more money in life, then I'll be happy. If I can get this car or this boat or this house, this class, this vacation, then I'll be happy. Then I'll be content. And that's what's fed to us, what's preached to us, what's ingrained in us, especially at a young age. I know that's happened to me. Jeff Goins says this, that we wind up longing for the mountaintop and just exist in what we feel are the valleys of life. And most every day seems like a valley. What he's saying is, we're standing on a mountaintop of blessings. We're standing on a mountain of blessings. God has given us so much. But all we're doing is looking up instead of looking down at the blessings. We're looking up at the next thing. And so we treat this like it's a valley instead of a mountain. And he says, and every day it starts to feel like it's a valley. And we start to become more and more discontent. Ecclesiastes 6:9 says, it is better to enjoy what we have than to always want something else, because that makes no more sense than chasing the wind. There it is, sorry. In other words, you can't catch happiness. That's what this verse is saying. You can't catch happiness. If life circumstances have to agree with you for you to be happy, you never will be. Brian's third quote, but before I read it, I want to describe an image to you. I'm told that the average American will use over 100 gallons of water a day, and that in Africa, the average citizen there will use only 5 gallons per day. There was a scene on a news, I watch the news in the mornings and at night sometimes, and on occasion, and there was a scene that they showed. They were doing a reporting story on it. It was in a remote African village out in the middle of nowhere in the African interior, and they were showing this process of how these people live, and they showed at one point this truck that comes in. It's a water truck, and it comes in daily. This is the only way people get water in this village, and it's the only way they can cook, the only way they can clean themselves, their houses, pretty much the only way they can do anything. You think about how many times we use water in a day. And this truck brings it to the village. And they showed this truck pulling in, and they showed all these mothers and young children running to this truck with buckets and bags and whatever else they had in their hands to fill up with water as soon as they could. And it was just a mob trying to get in on it. And this camera was panned in on it, and all of a sudden you heard the truck crank up, and it started to pull away, and the camera panned out. And there was a mother standing there. She had 2 buckets in her hands, a child beside her, and she didn't have any water. And you could see on her face the look of concern and worry as she thought, what am I going to do to take care of my children today? What am I going to do to feed my children today, to give them something to drink? Brian's third quote was this from his study of Philippians. When I reflect on the harsh realities encountered by people around the world who live in destitute poverty, hungry and huddled in shacks or tents, oppressed by cultures of death, I am humbled and even embarrassed by how richly blessed I am. How could I possibly be discontent with what I do or do not possess? How do I empathize with others who aren't as blessed as I am in life? What am I doing about the needs of others around me? A little background to Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 through 13 that we read earlier. The people in the church there have sent a financial gift to Paul. They have supported Paul's ministry in the past, but they haven't really been in a position in their congregation to support him financially. And so in verse 10, Paul is thanking them for their financial blessing. He's saying, thank you for demonstrating your concern for me again. Not that you haven't always been concerned, but you just lack the ability to show it financially. And Paul is thanking them for how they blessed him. And he goes on to say he recognizes that they've sacrificed to help meet Paul's needs. And he understands that this unexpected gift from them is really a gift from God. And he goes on to write, let's look at verse 11 again. Before we look at verse 11 again, is this. Remember that contentment begins with recognizing God's providence in our lives. Like Paul recognized that those Christians had sacrificed to meet his needs, to help support him financially. He recognized that it was because of God that they were able to do that. And that's important when you're talking about being content in your life, is to remember that contentment begins with recognizing God's providence in our lives. Let's look at verse 11 again. The secret of contentment is never forgetting that God is in charge of even the falling snow in your life. Verse 11 says this, I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. So Paul is saying, thank you for what you've done. Thank you for sending me this gift. Not that you haven't always supported me, but now you've supported me in a different way, that you sacrificed to support me. And I praise God for that, and I thank you for that. But here's the deal, guys. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content in whatever the circumstances. And that shows us from this passage that contentment is a learned behavior. It's not a reflex action. It's not something we're born with, to just be content on earth. I know it's not something I was born with, at least. I think by nature, at least I was, by nature, grew up knowing how to whine and argue and complain. That's what I was good at. And it has been a struggle to attempt to learn how to be content in life. And it's about learning this understanding of, if life circumstances have to be the way you want them to be, then you're never going to be content. If things have to be the way that you want them to be, you're never going to be happy. It isn't found from what's happening on the outside. Contentment is found from what's happening on the inside. Verse 12, Paul explains this, that contentment isn't about circumstances. He says in verse 12, I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. Paul had been poor in his life, and he found contentment there. He found happiness there. He had times when Paul was wealthy, and he was content with that. Paul had been in prison, mocked, persecuted, and even once shipwrecked, and he was still content with his life and the circumstances that he was in. There were times when Paul was surrounded by lots of loved ones and times when he was all alone in a jail cell singing praises to God. The deal is that through all of life's up and downs, Paul had learned this secret of being content. And that secret is that it doesn't have anything to do with what you have. So what is the secret? What is the big secret to the content life? How do we get to the point where we find true joy no matter what's going on, no matter how hard it gets, no matter how great it gets, no matter if everything's taken away from us like Job or everything's given to us like Job? How are we happy? How do we find that contentment? This is the secret here, is that contentment is only found in God. And we're going to elaborate upon that. That answer is found in verse 13, where Paul writes, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Contentment is only found in God. Verse 13 might be better translated, I have strength for all circumstances through him who strengthens me. So the secret to contentment is Christ. It's saying, I can't, and I won't be content without Christ. It doesn't matter how great my circumstances might be. It doesn't matter how bad my circumstances might be. Without Christ, I'm never going to be happy. So many people are unhappy in their jobs and in their relationships, and the programs they're involved with. I would say it's true for a lot of us that we kind of trudge through the week and we live for the weekend. I don't know if that's true for you, but maybe it is. And my guess is that a lot of you know what I'm talking about. Being upset and negative with your circumstances and the things that are going on, and you feel like you have a weight sitting on your chest. And just because we place our faith in God doesn't mean that that weight's going to be taken away. And the discontentment is not just going to magically disappear. So how do we learn this secret that Christ is all I need to be content? How do we learn it like Paul did? Well, perhaps the biggest obstacle to contentment is greed. Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 through 6. I've got it up on the screen here. Make sure that your character is free from the love of money, being content with what you have. For he himself said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you, so that we confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What will man do to me? How many of you said just this week maybe, if I could just have a little bit more money, if I could have just a little bit more of this, if this could just go this way, the way that I want it to go, everything will be good. I'll be so much happier. I find myself saying that quite a lot, that things can just go the way I want them to go. Why can't we just do that? The words if only are contentment killers. Those if only statements are contentment killers. There's a reason that coveting is in God's top 10 list of rules of not doing. And I've learned that looking to the greener grass on the other side, that idea of greed and always looking to the other things that you want, that you need, looking up to that mountaintop above you instead of the mountain below you, breeds selfishness, it breeds sin, it breeds discontentment. I've noticed in our society, I talked about this with someone the other day. You know how you can go church shopping? I know at least in my area where I'm from, Selmer, Tennessee. You've probably heard of it, maybe not. It's pretty small. But I'm from Selmer, and there's still a lot of churches in that area. And you can go church shopping. You can go try this one out and see how you like it. You can go try this one out and see if you like it. If you don't like this particular type of church, you can go to this other type. And it's that way with our churches. It's that way with our products, that you can go to the store. There's 452 brands of everything that you want. And not saying that's a bad thing all the time. But it does breed this idea of have it my way. If I don't like it, I'm just going to leave and go do what I want. Or if I don't like it, I'm just going to go get this and do it a different way. And Paul addresses this attitude. He addresses this attitude of have it my way and it's all about me over in 1 Timothy. He says in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 8, but godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. The world doesn't owe anyone anything. Nothing. I have 3 points and a couple more things and we'll be done. Number 1 is this. Give thanks for what you have instead of dwelling on what you don't have. If you ever catch yourself having that thought of, man, I wish, or if I only had, just try and stop and say thank you for a few things that you do have. Say thank you for the health. Thank you for the blessing. Number 2, recognize that God withholds no good thing from his children. Psalms 34:10 says, those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Number 3 is this: seek after that which is eternal rather than that which is temporary. If your heart is set on the things of this world, you will always be discontent, because these things cannot satisfy the deepest longings of the heart. Only Christ can do that. Brian's 4th quote: if we would have in ourselves the mind of Christ, who emptied himself for us, we would see others differently and see ourselves as empty. Empty enough to be content, content enough that we would be to others as Christ is to us. There once were 2 men who were both very seriously ill. They were stationed in the quiet ward, or whatever you want to call it, of the hospital or the nursing home that they were placed in. And these 2 men lived in a room probably about the size of this pulpit here. It was just big enough for 2 beds, one on that side of the room, one on that side of the room. You know, their nightstands, some of their medical equipment beside the beds, and that was it. There was a door leaving that room. Next to this man over here, on his wall, on the outside, was a window. And these men were placed in this quiet ward, this quiet area, having to deal with their nature of their illness. It was just recommended by doctors that they not really be disturbed, that there not be a whole lot of commotion going on. So there wasn't really any TV to watch or radio to listen to or really much of anything to do but lay there and stare at the ceiling all day. They couldn't go anywhere. So these men would lay there throughout the day, and they would talk to one another. They would talk about the things that they had seen, the things that they had done, they'd been through, the vacations they'd been on with their family. They'd talk about their wives and their kids and their grandkids, the things they'd done in the war. They talked all day long. And these men kind of became best friends while they were talking, and this went on week after week. And something that was neat was that every day, this man over here who laid down by the window, every day, for some reason, as a part of his treatment, the nurses would come in, they'd sit him up on his bed, let him sit up for a minute, for about an hour. It had something to do with draining some fluids or something, I don't know, I'm not a doctor. But he sat up in that bed for about an hour every day, and he looked outside that window. And for that moment, for that hour, they wouldn't talk. For that hour, he would look out that window, and he would describe everything that he saw to this man that laid there staring at the ceiling. He would describe the children playing, the boy throwing the frisbee to the dog, the family having a picnic. He would describe the leaves changing color in the fall, the snow falling down on the ground during the winter. He'd talk about the young boy holding hands with his girlfriend, how funny they thought it was, reminiscing on their times doing that. He would describe all kinds of things that were going on. And there was one day that he was doing that. During that hour, he was describing what's happening. This man laying over here in this bed, staring up at the ceiling, thought to himself, you know, why don't I get to look out the window? It doesn't really seem fair to me that he gets to see all of that and I don't. Why can't I see that? If I could only see that, I'd be a little bit happier probably. And he immediately said to himself, no, this isn't unfair, that's just how it is. And he tried to push that thought out of his mind. And same thing came back the next day. The man sat up in his bed, began describing what he saw outside of his window, all the amazing things that they didn't see inside, staring at the ceilings. And that thought crept back into his head. And every day this would repeat. And that thought would get stronger and louder until it got to a point where he became very upset, very ill at the other man who got to see the outside the window. And the nurses even noticed that this man became a little bit sicker. They couldn't understand why, because he was supposed to be getting better doing what he was doing. As time progressed, this kept on going, and he began to resent that hour of the day that he got explained what was happening outside. And he woke up one morning, some commotion in the room. The nurses were shuffling around. They were moving some things around, and he kind of motioned for one of them to come over near him, and he said, "Ma'am, excuse me, what's going on?" And she said, "Sir, I'm sorry to inform you, but this gentleman passed away during his sleep tonight." He said, "Okay, thank you for telling me." And they continued to clean up and get everything situated, and he motioned for her to come back over to his bed, and he said, "Ma'am, if it wouldn't be too much trouble, could you move me over there to the bed by the window?" She said, sure, that won't be a problem. We can do that. So they got him situated. They moved him over to the bed by the window. And as soon as the nurses had gone and he heard the door click shut, he began to painstakingly pull himself up on his elbows. And with every grunt and every pull that he made himself up there, as soon as he could get eye level with that window, as soon as he could see over the windowsill, this is something he'd been longing for such a long time. He had spent weeks having to listen to someone describe this stuff, and now he can actually see it for the first time. And as he pulled himself up, he turned his head and he looked out that window, and all he could see was a brick wall. How many people do you know in life who could see a brick wall, could be facing a circumstance like that brick wall in their life, and be able to use, even if they have to use their imagination, turn it into something so much greater, something that's going to help other people? You see that man that laid there every day, he started a brick wall, but he gave images and things that this man hadn't seen in a long time, and he explained it to him and let him kind of get a taste of that again. And how many other people do you know, maybe even yourself, that if you're faced with a brick wall, that's all you see? If you're given a window, all you see is a brick wall. As the Apostle Paul said, he learned contentment. So where is true contentment found? I'm going to give you one final quote from Brian Cobb, and we'll be finished. And this quote addresses our spiritual conditions and how we need to embrace it in order for us to grow. How we need to embrace the circumstances around us in order for us to grow and get out of it. He says this: one key to contentment is the acceptance and spiritual ownership of a situation or circumstance. If you don't embrace it as your own, you won't deal with it. If you don't embrace it as your own, for what will the Lord strengthen you? Wrap yourself, heart, mind, and soul around that circumstance, and the Lord and His strength will wrap Himself around you. Maybe you need the Lord to come and wrap His garment around you tonight. I know sometimes in life that it can become to be very negative. A lot of bad things come at you. It's hard to stay positive sometimes in this world. If you need the strength that can come from God, from the prayers of this church, the love that they can give you, if you need help getting out of that slump, getting out of that valley that you feel that you're in, and help to get some perspective, to recognize the blessings that you've been given, I'd ask that you do that tonight. And I'd ask that if you haven't been baptized, that if you aren't a part of that family, that Christian family where you can learn to be content with Christ, that you think about that tonight. And maybe you make that decision. Because there's no greater peace, no greater blessing, no greater joy, no greater form of contentment and happiness than knowing that you're saved and that you'll be able to fellowship with God one day. If you need any help at all, if you need anything tonight, please come while we do that and as we sing.